What's up, guys? Welcome back to White Sox Daily once again. A little bit more White Sox news as we get further on into the week. So we'll go ahead and jump right on into it with the newest White Sox free agent signings. They will add a little bit more depth to their bullpen, to their relief situation, and bringing in a hometown kid in the form of most recently ex-Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher Ryan Borucki. He comes to the White Sox after a bit of a down year in Pittsburgh. Ended up with a 5.28 ERA while he was there across 35 games. Ended up being traded back to Toronto, where he originally played for a majority of his career. He was drafted there in 2012. He was a straight out of high school draft pick, ended up working his way up, made his big league debut, ended up playing from 2018 to 2024 there in Toronto, where he was mostly decent. Posted a 3.87 ERA as a rookie. Also had several other really solid seasons, particularly in 2023, where he posted a 2.45. He's a guy that had plenty of really decent showings throughout his career, especially season to season when he was in Toronto. And then when they traded him back to Toronto after a fairly abysmal start with Pittsburgh last season, he only appeared in 4 games from that point, but he pitched 4 shutout innings through those 4 appearances. So not a completely terrible showing when he's back where he seems to feel more at home there with the Blue Jays. Pittsburgh Pirates stint, obviously a bit of an anomaly there. The White Sox are hoping that potentially they get the original version, the Toronto Blue Jays version of Borucki when he comes here to the South Side. He's a guy that is originally from the Chicagoland area, grew up in North Chicago. Mark Burley, he's on record saying, was his favorite player when he was a kid growing up. Loved watching him when he was on the Chicago White Sox. Wore number 56 early in his career, specifically because of his fanhood of Mark Burley. So definitely an interesting tie. White Sox fans certainly know what it's like to cheer for and admire Mark Burley ourselves. So could be an interesting signing, could be fun. If he puts together some really solid innings, you know how much Chicagoans love a good hometown kid. Could be a fun story to watch as the season goes on. We also had an ESPN article drop just yesterday where they ranked every single team in Major League Baseball based on their offseason to this point. The grading scale was as follows. To give someone a 1, as they list it, means your work is basically or all the way done. Not much left to do for your offseason. A 2 means having a strong winter, but would certainly need a little bit more help. 3 will judge their winner on when and where it goes from here. 4 is we're waiting. And 5, it has been a disaster. And that was kind of their grading criteria for this particular article. The Chicago White Sox not only given a 1 rating, meaning their urgency rating is pretty much done, you're good to go, play ball, but they're also ranked as the number 1 off-season to this point, which is a little bit on the surprising end. Likely just because of the expectations themselves perhaps being a little bit lower for the White Sox. I can only imagine bringing in Murakami obviously was a huge deal for them. Bringing in Anthony Kay and Sean Newcomb certainly helps with the pitching situation, not to mention we just mentioned going out and getting a guy like Borucki to come in here and help out of the bullpen. Certainly none of these things hurt. And you understand that. But then when you also think that the New York or the Los Angeles Dodgers just, signed Kyle Tucker, kind of odd to have anyone else at that number 1 spot, but we'll take it. Some recognition given to the Chicago White Sox, not something that happens particularly often in the national media sphere. White Sox normally one of the more forgotten teams across professional sports and Major League Baseball in particular, but nice to see them getting a little bit of recognition, particularly with the Mooney Murakami signing that obviously we were hugely excited about. some of the lesser signings here, bringing in some of those pitchers, probably going to be a little helpful. Nothing that overly changes anything about the team at this point. And then speaking of the offseason and some potential options that are now on the table for the Chicago White Sox, we talked about the international free agency periods signings. Talked about it yesterday on the channel, going out and getting the number one catching prospect in the international signings pool. Certainly gives you a look to the future, a potential, catcher of the distant future. He's only 17 years old right now. A lot of their current young guys are in their mid-20s, early 20s. Still a bit of a gap there, enough of a gap. You could certainly see that as two separate generations of catchers potentially, especially if some of these guys don't end up working out quite the way you think that they should. But one other thing this certainly gives the Chicago White Sox is the option, if they choose to go this route, to trade Korey Lee. We know there was a lot of interest in the White Sox catchers. Kyle Teel was getting huge interest. The White Sox didn't have any interest in sending him. Edgar Quero got a couple of questions. Korey Lee was someone that a lot of teams were highly interested in. And at first, the White Sox were just not interested in moving anybody at all. But now, with a little bit more depth, a little bit further development now down there in the system at that position, it certainly opens up some potential options here if you choose to ship Korey Lee out. He's the oldest of the group. He's the most expendable to this point, with Teel and Quero, presumably going to be the future of the backstop for the Chicago White Sox, and a heck of a 1-2 punch. Korey Lee kind of finds himself as the odd man out in the group, a guy who probably will get a couple of periodic plays when other guys need rest, certain situations like that, but a guy that's not expected to be a massive contributor, an everyday player, anything to that nature. He's arguably more valuable now as a trade piece. There's a whole lot of smoke, of course, every single day it feels like, since 2023 about Luis Robert potentially being traded. I think Korey Lee is going to be a lot more interesting to monitor, a guy that I think gives you a lot more value to ship him out than Luis Robert, because Luis Robert is still more desperately needed with the Chicago White Sox, whereas Korey Lee, now at this point, if you can get another starting pitcher for him, if you can get maybe some outfield help, I think that would certainly be a situation where it's a lot more favorable for the Chicago White Sox than shipping Luis out. And it's a lot more favorable than it was shortly ago when the White Sox didn't have such a stockpile of catching talent. And that'll move us right after that one to our final bit of news of the day, as we were kind of talking about relief pitching, some of the help the Chicago White Sox were looking to get. Earlier on in the offseason, we mentioned on this channel the White Sox taking a big swing on Ryan Rollison from the Colorado Rockies, a guy that had not really been living up to their expectations of him there in Colorado, but we all know how difficult it is to pitch there in Colorado. A guy that had been struggling with giving up some, power, a 7.02 ERA for Colorado last season. 31 relief appearances to just one start, a guy with a 25% strikeout rate, 7.1 walk percentage, not necessarily, the worst numbers in the world that way, but the 7.02 ERA, just not good enough quality in any capacity. The White Sox, though, were hoping that as a guy with a lot of raw talent, a guy that was a former first-round pick, a guy with some mid-90s fastball velocity, that maybe you bring him to Chicago, maybe you coach him up, maybe you just get him out of the Colorado thin air and, see what can happen with it. See if you can maybe fix a talented superstar that just hasn't had a great deal of luck to this point, fulfilling his full potential. But that's just not going to happen this particular time, as the Chicago Cubs are at it once again after snagging Ben Cowlis from us off waivers just last week. the Chicago Cubs have now added Rollison via the exact same method off of the waiver system from the Chicago White Sox. And so the Cubs continue to be a bit of waiver wire vultures at the moment, kind of poaching a couple of Chicago White Sox Hail Mary type signings that they had made. Oh well, but newsworthy nonetheless, as the White Sox had some hopes that they were going to be able to turn Rollison around a little bit here in Chicago. And now, if that's still going to happen, it might still be in Chicago, but it's not going to be with the White Sox organization. That'll do it for tonight's episode. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. I've been Aaron Feely. This has been White Sox Daily.